You are listening to Rewritten Fates, a dark fantasy romance series. Book 1, I Woke Up as the Condemned Duchess. Chapter 5, The Royal Ball. The palace underwent a chilling metamorphosis after sunset. During the day, it was a fortress of gray stone and cold authority. But at night, it transformed into something far more deceptive. Haunting orchestral music drifted through the marble corridors like a ghost, and the flickering candlelight against the golden walls turned every shadow into a secret. Nobles dressed in heavy silks and crushed velvets filled the halls, their laughter sounding just a little too sharp, like the clinking of expensive glass before it shatters. The court had gathered for the evening ball. It was to be a celebration, but for me, it was a gauntlet. The entire kingdom was about to witness the Duke's newest scandal, his condemned wife. I stood in the center of my new chambers while 3 palace attendants adjusted the heavy folds of my gown. The silence was absolute. None of them spoke. None of them dared to look me in the eye. Apparently, marrying the most dangerous duke in the kingdom hadn't done much to improve my reputation. To them, I was still the monster, just a monster in better clothes. One servant fastened a midnight black ribbon around my wrist. Another smoothed the skirt of my dress. The gown was breathtaking. Layers of black silk adorned with silver embroidery that caught the light like frost on a dead branch. It was elegant. It was powerful. It was completely inappropriate for a celebration. In other words, it was perfect for a villainess. When the servants finally retreated, the heavy chamber door creaked open behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who stood there. I could feel the sudden drop in temperature. "You're late," Alaric said. I caught his reflection in the mirror. He was dressed in formal black, his silhouette cutting a sharp line against the opulence of the room. No armor tonight, and yet he looked infinitely more dangerous without it. "I thought condemned brides were allowed to keep the court waiting," I replied, meeting his golden eyes in the glass. "It's one of the few perks of the position." His gaze lingered on my reflection, tracing the line of the silver embroidery. "You look like you're attending a funeral." "Perhaps I am," I said softly. "The question is, whose?" A flicker of something unreadable passed over his face. He walked toward the door, gesturing for me to follow. "The court expects a performance tonight, Elara." "What kind of performance?" "The kind where my wife behaves like someone who actually wants to survive the next 48 hours. "Ah, so we were playing roles now. Husband and wife, protector and protected. It was a dangerous game to play with a man who could see through steel." "Then lead the way, Your Grace," I said, stepping toward him. The ballroom doors opened with a resonant echo that seemed to swallow the music for a split second. Inside, the royal court glittered beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Light spilled across the polished marble floors like liquid diamonds, and the scent of expensive wine and heavy perfume hung thick in the air. The moment we stepped inside, the room went silent. Then the whispers erupted, a frantic, hissing tide that followed us as we moved. The Duke. And the traitor. She actually had the nerve to show her face. I kept my chin high, my gaze fixed forward. If they expected to see a broken woman trembling with fear, I would ensure they were bitterly disappointed. Alaric's hand settled lightly at the small of my back as we navigated the crowd. To an observer, the gesture looked intimate, possessive even. but the firm, unrelenting pressure of his fingers told a different story. It was a command: stay close, behave, survive. High above us, on a raised balcony overlooking the floor, sat the king. Beside him stood the saintess. Lyra's golden hair seemed to glow with its own inner light, radiating a serenity that felt entirely at odds with the predatory atmosphere of the room. Her smile remained perfect as she watched us enter, but her eyes were fixed on me with the focus of an archer. Duke Viremont! A nobleman stepped into our path, a silver chalice of wine in his hand. He was tall and wore an expression of practiced arrogance, the kind of man who found sport in the suffering of others. "Congratulations on your marriage," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. His gaze slid toward me, dripping with condescension. "And of course, my deepest condolences." A ripple of polite, cruel laughter moved through the nearby nobles. I felt the tension spike in Alaric's frame. His arm tightened around my waist, drawing me flush against his side. "Careful, Lord Hadrian," Alaric said, his voice dropping into a calm, terrifying register. "My wife might mistake your wit for disrespect, and I find myself in a particularly protective mood tonight." The nobleman blinked, his smirk faltering as he looked into Alaric's gold eyes. I meant no offense, Your Grace." "Then you chose your words poorly. See that it doesn't happen again." The laughter died instantly. Lord Hadrian bowed stiffly, his face pale, and retreated into the safety of the crowd. I was stunned. The Duke had just defended me in front of the entire court. That hadn't been in the original story. In the book, Alaric had treated Elara with a cold, professional indifference until the moment of her death. "You're altering expectations," I murmured, leaning slightly toward him so only he could hear. "Good," Alaric replied, his eyes scanning the room. "Confusion keeps one's enemies cautious. Never let them think they know your next move." The orchestra shifted, the violins rising into a slower, more haunting melody. Couples began to drift toward the center of the floor. Alaric turned to me, his hand extending in a silent command. "Dance." It wasn't a request. The entire court was watching, their necks craned to see how the traitor Duchess would move. To refuse would be an admission of weakness. I placed my hand in his, my skin humming where it touched his glove. The music swelled, and we stepped into the rhythm. For a long moment, we simply moved together, the black silk of my gown swirling around his boots. "You handled the court well," he said quietly, his breath warm against my temple. "Disappointing people seems to be my new specialty." "You didn't panic when Hadrian insulted you? Why?" "I've discovered I prefer breathing to screaming," I replied. "It's much more efficient." That earned me the faintest hint of genuine amusement in his eyes, a spark of gold in the dark. "Most criminals beg when they are cornered," he said. "I've never been fond of begging, Alaric. It rarely gets one what they want." The music carried us across the floor, a dark waltz in a room full of light. Around us, the whispers continued, but they felt further away now. Then the melody shifted again. The air in the room seemed to grow thin, and the dancers near the edge of the floor began to pull back. I looked toward the grand staircase. Lyra was descending. The saintess of light moved through the crowd like a living miracle. Every noble stepped aside, heads bowing in a synchronized wave of worship. When she reached the ballroom floor, she didn't head for the king. She walked directly toward us. The music stopped. The dancers froze. Lyra stopped before us, her blue robes glowing, her expression one of pure, radiant warmth. "Duke Viremont," she said gently, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "May I borrow your wife for a moment?" The request was phrased politely, but the tension in the room sharpened until it felt like a physical weight. Alaric's hand remained firmly, stubbornly at my waist. "For what purpose, saintess?" he asked. Lyra's eyes met mine. They were wide, blue, and utterly terrifying. "I would simply like to offer the Duchess another blessing," she said sweetly. "Private prayers are so much more effective." My stomach tightened into a knot. Another test, another trap. And judging by the razor-sharp edge beneath the saintess's smile, this one was going to be far more intimate than the last. But in the royal court, nothing is ever truly over. Secrets move in the shadows, and every choice rewrites fate. Continue the story in the next episode of Rewritten Fates, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.